From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and here's what's coming up. K-State's just completed 2019 wheat variety performance test results. We'll have along our way K-State's Jane Lingenfelser to talk about the top-performing varieties in each region of Kansas. Jane also looks specifically at the test results for the 5 most widely planted varieties this past year. And she'll talk about varieties from programs not only from Kansas, but from programs around the region, and where they're best suited for good production here in Kansas. Further ahead on this week's Wildlife Management segment, K-State's Charlie Lee will talk about the Mississippi Kite and a new study of its protective behavior around its nesting sites. Plus much more on this Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. We're around to that time each summer where we have the opportunity to recap the results of K-State's annual wheat variety performance trials. At locations all around the state of Kansas, these trials are conducted, and they're summarized in a handy book that you producers can use to reference variety performance in planning for your next wheat planting coming up quite soon. We're glad to have back by again Jane Lingenfelser. Jane is the agronomist in charge of the crop performance tests here at Kansas State. And Jane, first of all, right out the chute, that information is available to producers, right?
It is. The 2019 wheat seed book will be available as an insert in the High Plains Journal magazine on August 19th. And the book contains the results from the 2018-2019 wheat performance tests, which we will talk about next. And it also has the wheat seed directory from the Kansas Crop Improvement Association. And our individual location results are already available on our website. That address is agronomy.ksu.edu. And an electronic version of the agronomic portion of the wheat seed book can also be found at the K-State Research and Extension Digital Library. That address is ksre.ksu.edu/bookstore, and look for the wheat book. And the wheat seed directory from the KCIA does not contain the performance test results, but it has the directory, and that address at the KCIA website is kscrop.org.
Very well, and we will repeat that information. But as you look at the 2019 wheat performance tests, at how many locations did you evaluate wheat this year?
Well, the structure of the test, we have 21 locations, which are organized into 9 regions with different climate and management practices. However, after this year, I will only be able to share the results of 12 locations from 6 regions, as it was a very challenging year for wheat production in Kansas.
This has been a really atypical year, and typical, who knows what that might be, but it was a difficult wheat production season for some. For others, it was a better than good season.
It was. This year was dubbed the Tale of Two Crops by Romulo Lolato. He is the K-State Extension Wheat Specialist, and Mary Knapp, who is the K-State Climatologist. And the Tale of Two Crops is very appropriate for this year. In the central and eastern portions of the state, we had an extremely challenged but resilient wheat crop, and in western Kansas, the crop enjoyed nearly optimal conditions.
As you normally do each year, Jane, you summarize the top performers in each region of Kansas. Let's go region by region around the state, find out how those regions' tests did in general, and which wheats tended to rise to the top in each location. Noting, though, you started with 21 and you ended up with 12 once again, right?
That's right, and I will remind everyone to please keep the extenuating conditions and your own environmental and management conditions in mind as we discuss these results. For our regions, we start with northeast Kansas. We had 1 location in Manhattan. Manhattan averaged 68 bushels per acre. That's up 20 bushels from last year. Manhattan was treated with a fungicide in the spring. And our top yielders in Manhattan, experimental from Agromax, is AMEX1508C and Westbred WB4699. Also this year, because of the high incidence of scab and environmental conditions, we also raked some of the varieties that were significant in test weight. Mm-hmm. And so in the Northeast region, Everest, Zenda, and Gallagher, along with Agromax AMEX1508C and Westbred WB4699, were significantly higher in test weight.
Your tests in southeast Kansas were burdened with extremely late planting, right?
Yes, these tests at Parsons and Ottawa were not able to be planted until December 4th. Consequently, they didn't emerge until late March, and when they did, Ottawa was also nailed with a severe hailstorm and pretty much the whole gambit of poor conditions. So as a result, the southeast region was dropped completely. But the top yielders from last year, 2018, Lima Grain LCS Chrome did well. Also Westbred WB4515 and Cropland 7826 did well in southeast Kansas.
Well, you were able to follow through, Jane, with the test results in north central Kansas at 2 locations, correct?
Yes, we had locations in Belleville and Beloit. The average for north central region was 66 bushels. That's up 30 from last year. Beloit was treated with a fungicide. Belleville was not treated with a fungicide, and scab was a very significant issue at Belleville. But our top yielders in the north central region, AgriPro Bob Dole did well. That experimental from Agromax, AMEX1508C, also Zenda from Kansas Wheat Alliance, and Lima Grain LCS Link did well. Our significant test weight performers, Everest from KWA, also AgriPro SY517CL2, AG Robust from AgSeco, and Cropland 7826 were significant test weight performers in the north central region.
All right. Your central Kansas tests, unfortunately, they succumbed to adverse conditions likewise.
Yes. Gibson and Lorraine were both lost to hail. Shortly after planting in the case of Gibson and shortly before harvest for Lorraine, we unfortunately lost our intensive management trials in the central region as well. But the top yielders in 2018, Lima Grain LCS Mint did well. Showdown, it's a new variety from OGI, Oklahoma, did well. And Plains Gold, Whistler, did well in the central region last year.
South central Kansas, well, it wasn't a complete washout, so to speak. You did manage to follow through with one of the tests, but a couple of the others were, unfortunately, not salvageable.
Right. We lost McPherson to heavy rains in the spring, and Conway Springs was lost to waterlogged soils also in the spring. We were able to regroup. Hutchinson had a yield of 74 bushels. That's up 30 bushels from last year. Hutchinson was not treated with a fungicide, and leaf and stripe rust were present and severe in some cases. Also at Hutchinson, Romulo Lolato conducted a hollow stem study, and that information is available at the KSRE Digital Library. But in regards to the performance tests, the top yielders at Hutchinson, AgriPro Bob Dole did well, Lima Grain LCS Chrome, and a new variety from Oklahoma, OGI Green Hammer, has done well.
You move to the western part of the state. Starting with northwest Kansas, the performance numbers improved markedly.
They did. We had tests at Hayes, Colby, Tribune, and Decatur. The overall average for the northwest region was 95 bushels. That's up almost 50 bushels from last year. Wow. Colby, Tribune, and Decatur all had 100-plus averages this year. Fungicide was applied at Tribune and Decatur. And our top yielders in the northwest region, an experimental from Kansas, it's KS15H116-6. Also Breck from Plains Gold and AgroPro SY18AX did well. Our top test weight performers, Lone Rider from OGI, also Long Branch from Dynagro, and Westbred WB4792 did well in regards to test weight. And our historical top yielders, Tatanka from KWA, also Lone Rider from OGI, Long Branch from Dynagro, and Langen from Plains Gold did well in the Northwest region.
And your Southwest dryland tests, well, not all went well. You did experience lost tests at 2 locations.
We did. We lost Larned and Mullinville. We decided that the variability was too high for any valid comparisons. We had Garden City in Finney County, which averaged 95 bushels. That's up almost 30 bushels from last year. No fungicide was applied at Garden City. And our top yielders there, an experimental from Kansas again, KS15H 161-1, also Langen from Plains Gold, Westbred WB4792, and SY Wolverine from AgroPro did well in the Southwest region.
And how about the irrigated trials in the western part of the state, Jane? They obviously yielded quite well, but what did the numbers tell us?
They did very well. We had tests at Colby, Garden City, and Healy. The average across the region was 110 bushel. Healy was slightly dinged by hail, but literally every variety at Colby and Garden City averaged 100 plus bushel. Fungicide was applied at Garden City and Healy. And our top yielders there, AgroPro SY Wolverine, Westbred WB4792, and another experimental from Westbred XB4520 did well. Our top test weight performers, all of the same varieties I mentioned, also Zenda and Tatanka, did well in regards to test weight in the irrigated region.
But we're not done, because we want to take this from another perspective, look at the top 5 varieties by acreage in the state and how well they did within the entire scope of the trials. And Jane, if you'd stand by, we'll continue on that theme in just a moment. Jane Lingenfelser is with us, the agronomist in charge of K-State's crop performance tests, as we're reviewing the 2019 K-State Wheat Variety Performance Trial results. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
We're back now on this Agriculture Today, and we're spending the first part of today's broadcast going over the just completed results of K-State's 2019 wheat variety performance tests all throughout the state. As noted earlier, some of those tests didn't make it to the finish line, but several others did and rendered good data for you producers to use in your variety selection for the 2019-20 winter wheat crop. Across the way once more, Jane Lingenfelser, agronomist in charge of K-State's crop performance tests. Jane, what we'd like to do now to lend a little bit different spin on these results, look at those top 5 varieties planted in Kansas this past growing season and see how they did. And this is based on the acreage numbers from the USDA, right?
Yes, these are the top 5 varieties of wheat seeded in 2019, according to the Kansas Ag Statistics. And in the number 1 spot this year, SY Monument from AgroPro Syngenta. Monument is positioned for the central and western Kansas. It is rated to have excellent overall leaf disease package. And in the performance test, Monument did the best in the south central region, Hutchinson, where leaf and stripe rust were definitely issues. It did well in the northwest region and averaged a little over 96% of the test average at the other regions in the tests.
It has been a staunch performer in the tests last couple of 3 years or so. What was the number 2 wheat?
Number 2, WB Grainfield moved into the 2 slot. Grainfield is positioned for areas north of I-70 and west of I-35 in Kansas. And Grainfield has moderately good resistance to leaf diseases. This year, that was quite an issue, so it was right at test average for regions with a slight dip at the south central region. It performed the best at the southwest regions.
The number 3 wheat on the acreage list, unfortunately, wasn't entered in the tests. You might explain.
Winterhawk was the 3rd most popular wheat seeded. Winterhawk is positioned for most of Kansas, excluding the southeast, because of its excellent drought tolerance. It is susceptible to stem rust and moderately susceptible to leaf and stripe rust, and Winterhawk was not entered in the 2019 test, but in the past it has done best in the central Kansas region.
And number 4 on the list, well, it is a standby, has been for a few years in the state, isn't it?
It is, but it's actually new to the top 5. The number 4th most popular seeded variety was Zenda from KWA. Zenda is positioned for eastern and central Kansas, and it's among the best varieties regarding tolerance to scab, which held it in very good stead this year. It is moderately resistant to stem, leaf, and stripe rust. And Zenda did best in the performance test. It did above average in the northeast and north central regions where scab was an issue. And it also did fairly well in the south central region.
And the 5th most widely planted wheat in Kansas this past year at one time occupied the number 1 slot, and it's still in the top 5. How did it do?
Everest from Kansas Wheat Alliance is in the number 5 slot. Everest is positioned throughout the state. It tends to do very well. It's among one of the highest rated varieties for scab tolerance, which also held it in good stead this year. It is susceptible to stripe rust, but responds well to spray. It did best in the performance test in the north central region, and it was slightly lower in the south central. However, Hutchinson wasn't sprayed this year, but Everest has been a well performer in the performance tests.
Indeed. Well, as folks heard earlier, there are not only Kansas-originating wheat varieties in the trials, but from several other states as well. Those are included in the performance report. So we want to take a look at those and how they did in general and how well they've shown to be suited for Kansas growing conditions, starting with those originating in Kansas through the Kansas Wheat Alliance.
Yes. The KWA also entered Larry. Larry did the best in the northeast region. We had the white wheat Joe. Joe performed above the test average in the western regions. Oakley also performed right about average in the western regions. Tatanka performed very well in the northwest region. We had 3 experimentals, KS14HW 106-6-6. It performed well above average in the northwest and southwest regions. It was right at test average in the irrigated region. And then 2 that have recently been named, KS15H 116-6-1 will now be released as Kansas Dallas. And that variety averaged above average in the northwest and southwest regions. And the final experimental, KS15H 161-1-1, will be released as Kansas Western Star, and it yielded well above average in the northwest and southwest regions.
It'll be great to see how well those new entries fare as they're released for full production here soon. The varieties out of the programs in Oklahoma, as one would expect, are suited mostly for the southern reaches of Kansas, but not exclusively so, as you noted earlier as you went through the region-by-region summary.
Right. OGI entered Gallagher. It yielded well above average in the south-central region, but it was probably the best of the Oklahoma varieties at the northeast regions. Also, Bentley was well above average in south-central. Iba performed the best in the northeast region. Lone Rider performed well in the northwest, southwest, and irrigated regions. Double Stop CL Plus was well above average in the south central. Smith's Gold performed well in the northeast, but was above average in south central. The White Wheat Stardust was slightly below in south central region. Spirit Rider was above average in South Central. And then there was 2 new varieties. They were entered last year as experimentals, but they have since been released. Showdown did the best in the irrigated region, and Green Hammer yielded above average in South Central, and of all the Oklahoma lines, performed the best at the South Central region.
Then there are those varieties which come to us from the Colorado program under the Plains Gold heading. Tell about those.
Yes, we had Canvas. It performed the best in Southwest, but of all the Plains Gold varieties, it was performed the best at the North Central region. Also, Crescent AX performed best in the Northwest. Langan was the best in Southwest region, but of the Plains Gold varieties, it was the best at the Southwest region. Whistler performed best in the Northwest. Avery performed best in the Northwest. Breck was above average in the Western test, and it was the best of the Plains Gold varieties in the Northwest and the irrigated regions. Bird was above average in the Northwest. Monarch performed the best in the irrigated region, and Bird CL Plus was just about test average in the Southwest.
And to round out the story here, varieties were in the trials this year from the programs to our north out of Nebraska.
Husker Genetics actually entered 3 experimentals. NE 10478-1 was actually licensed by Lima Grain as LCS Valiant. So we had NHH 144913-3. It performed above average at the North Central region, and it was just about at test average in the Northwest. And also NW 13493, which performed at the test average in the Southwest region.
Now, once again, producers, you'll want to check this data out, cross-reference it with your location, your growing conditions, and the like. So with this overview in mind, Jane, you'd encourage producers to get a hold of the data, study it, and make good use of it.
That's right. This is just a very brief overview of the state-sponsored varieties entered in the 2019 performance test this year, but other very good resources for more information on state-sponsored and also private varieties can be found at Wheat Varieties for Kansas and the Great Plains by Leighton Emke. Also, the Wheat Variety Disease and Insect Ratings by Eric DeWolf, Jeff Whitworth, and Romulo Lolato. And also, Colorado has a very nice database, wheat variety database, and that address is ramwheatdb.com.
And as you mentioned earlier, and we'll close with this, the 2019 Wheat Seed Book will be out quite soon. There are multiple ways of obtaining that.
Yep, the Wheat Seed Book will be out on August 19th as an insert in the High Plains Journal. The individual location results can be found at agronomy.ksu.edu. Also, the entire book, with the exception of the Wheat Seed Directory, can be found at the K-State Research and Extension Digital Library. That address is ksre.ksu.edu/bookstore. And the Wheat Seed Directory from the KCIA can be found at kscrop.org.
Well, congratulations, Jane, to you and your team for conducting these wheat trials and seeing them through, given the adversities that hit many of them. Thank you for the summary right here, and we always appreciate you passing along the information.
Thanks for having me.
The agronomist in charge of K-State's crop performance trials, Jane Lingenfelser, passing along the highlights from the 2019 Kansas wheat performance trials conducted by K-State across multiple locations in the state this past growing season. Growers, this information made available to you for your reference as you go about your wheat variety selection decisions for the forthcoming wheat production season. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and we'll be back in a few moments on the K-State Radio Network.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128-plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
in our 95th year of service to Kansas agriculture, this is the K-State Radio Network, and you're listening to Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Over now to today's agricultural news page and these headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, the USDA surprised the market, to say the least, yesterday by increasing corn production to 13.9 billion bushels and raising the average national yield by more than 3 bushels, up to 169.5 bushels per acre. The acres to corn projected at 90 million, down 1.7 million acres from the earlier planted acres report from the USDA. And the USDA said that farmers planted 76.7 million acres to soybeans, according to its revised planting survey, with a national average yield of 48.5 bushels projected. The total production forecast at 3.68 billion bushels. The production estimate, a 19% drop from last year, while within the range of pre-report estimates, that production figure was toward the lower end of that range. Here's more on that report from the USDA's Rod Bain.
The big question from USDA's August crop report: how would the recent resurvey of growers impact both corn and soybean production estimates from the previous month? The answers from USDA Chief Economist Rob Johansson, starting with corn.
We're about 600 million bushels above the trade expectations. So corn coming in at a higher level than perhaps the trade was expecting.
With total production estimates for corn for grain down 2% from July, but yields forecasted up 3.5% month over month. As for soybeans,
the conventional wisdom is that if producers weren't able to get in plant corn, they would go in and plant soybeans, but that's actually not what we saw.
With production estimates down 4% from the previous month, 19% from 2018, and yields remaining unchanged from July.
Overall, at the midpoint, we are below what the trade was expecting, pretty significantly below, down 150 million bushels roughly at the midpoint.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Also, according to the certified acreage data released yesterday by the Farm Service Agency, producers were not able to plant crops on more than 19.4 million acres here in 2019. Not surprisingly, more than 73% of the prevented planted acres were in 12 Midwestern states, where the heavy rainfall and flooding this year prevented many producers from planting mostly corn, beans, and some spring wheat. That data is also utilized by NASS in putting that crop production report together relative to acreage, while NASS said in issuing its crop production report that the data is not likely complete. It said it's also important to note that the data reported to FSA over an extended period of time with varying due dates across the country would historically be incomplete in early August. NASS went on to say these data normally don't become nearly complete until September for cotton and October for corn, soybeans, and sorghum. And Tyson Foods said yesterday its beef plant at Holcomb will be shut down indefinitely after that weekend fire, but the company will rebuild and employees will be paid until production resumes there. The Holcomb facility processes up to 6,000 cattle per day. That accounts for about 5% of U.S. cattle slaughter. Steve Stauffer, Group President of Tyson Fresh Meat, said it's a difficult time for our team members and their families, and we want to ensure that they are taken care of. He said that the team members will be paid weekly until production resumes. Tyson operates 6 plants in Kansas, and the company said it's taking steps to move production to alternative sites. Next up for you on Agriculture Today, our weekly feature for you dairy producers, Milk Lines with K-State Dairy Specialist Mike Brook. Mike?
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy farmers concerning our forage quality as we move through the next 12 to 18 months. As I look at the growing conditions that we've had during the summer so far, it hasn't really helped us probably on the forage quality side. We have had a lot of moisture, which has resulted in some very good yields. However, it has really interfered with the harvesting of things like alfalfa hay and even some of our small grain silages as well. As a result of that, at least the analysis that I see coming through on a regular basis indicate that we have more fiber in this forage and that fiber is less digestible in most cases. Not in all, but in most cases. As we look at our corn silage crop, it's been cooler and wetter than normal, so there's been less stress, at least heat stress on the plant, although in some cases we do have instances where it's been actually too wet, and that has stunted the growth of that crop. We also had a lot of later planting, so that's going to probably have a negative impact on the starch levels that we might actually see in that forage. And as we look forward, some of this is going to mature fairly late, so there is the possibility we have an early frost that we may have some issues with starch content due to the fact that the grain may not be fully mature when we see the first killing frost. So what does this mean for a Kansas dairy producer? Well, it's going to be a challenging year as we move forward and we try to feed these forages. There's going to be a lot of changes as we go through the feeding year, as we move from forage to forage, and as we move from even within a bunker, say, of corn silage that contains different fields that were grown under different conditions, maybe different harvest conditions as well. So as you look at that, what do you need to do? What do you need to be thinking about? Well, number one, as you harvest these forages, as you know, you're moving from field to field or from one issue to another issue, make sure you mark that in the silo. So when you start feeding out of that silo, you'll be able to help your nutritionists keep track of where you're at in the silo in terms of changes that he or she needs to be aware of as they balance your ration. I think the big challenge when we face these kinds of changes in forage quality is just trying to keep ahead of the cows. In order to keep ahead of the cows, we have to really have some idea of what we have in inventory for forages and the quality of those forages. So therefore, careful accounting of where you put things in the silo and where you put different fields into different piles is very, very important. If you're using bags, maybe it becomes simpler, but you still have to keep track of it. It's going to probably mean that you're going to spend more time with your nutritionist in the next 12 to 18 months as the two of you work through these changes that we're likely to see in forage quality. Again, the better job you do of keeping updated with your nutritionist and keeping your nutritionist informed as to the possible forage changes coming ahead for the herd, the more likely your cows will respond with higher levels of milk production. This is Mike Brook with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to really pay attention to forage quality as we move through the next 12 to 18 months.
Thanks, Mike, as always. Our weekly conversation on wildlife management with K-State's Charlie Lee is next on Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Agriculture Today returns now, and again we take another look at an aspect of wildlife management with Charlie Lee joining us, wildlife specialist, K-State Research and Extension. Charlie today will review a study of the Mississippi Kite, which can be found in Kansas, and it does pose a nuisance at times, which we'll get into, but tell us a bit more about this bird.
Well, the Mississippi kites have become a rather abundant raptor in many urban and rural areas throughout the southern Great Plains. Unfortunately, those human-wildlife conflicts have resulted from these very graceful raptors nesting in areas in close proximity to people. This is a bird that's found basically throughout the state, perhaps except maybe in the northern tier of counties in Kansas. They're a very graceful flying bird, a light gray color on top and black, have a very deep red-colored eye, which is very striking when you contrast it against the very light gray head. They nest at the top of trees, sometimes maybe as low as 20 feet off of the ground, and are very protective of their nest. They rarely show aggression to other hawks. Occasionally they're aggressive to predators like hawks and owls, crows, and often are predatory in defending their nest against humans. So when they're nesting next to where people are constantly walking or perhaps playing golf, they can cause conflicts with people.
In fact, they can inflict injury on folks.
Yeah, normally they just swoop at people, often 2, 3, 4 feet away, but occasionally they also strike people as they're trying to defend their nest. Then they're frightening to people that may be elderly or youngsters that don't have many life experiences yet. But others are also frightened of this large bird that's swooping down at them and wonder what can be done. Typically, the approach taken by state agencies, because this is a federally protected bird, meaning you can't take the bird, the nest, or young. So we're kind of limited in what can be done there to mitigate these conflicting situations. Historically, we often took young out of the nest and sent them to rehabilitation centers. And then when those young were able to be released, they were often shipped to the southeastern part of the United States, where there were very few or no conflicts with people, primarily because of changes in regulatory action and perhaps including the cost of labor. No longer do we take young out of those nests and ship them to other states. We typically just ask people to avoid the area where the birds are nesting, and perhaps the situation will resolve itself. But these young are in the nest for 4 weeks, so probably start learning how to fly out of the nest at 5 weeks, and 5 weeks may be a long time to avoid using perhaps your backyard or a particular hole on a golf course.
But this difference in kite behavior geographically actually has inspired research on that.
The research was done at Texas Tech University. They looked at 2 different sites. They studied kite behavior in Lubbock, Texas, as well as kite behavior in the Palo Duro Canyon nearby there. Within the urban area of Lubbock, kite behavior was somewhat different. The response of Mississippi kites to a simulated human disturbance where they just had a technician walk under the nest, stop under the nest, spend a little bit of time there, and then walk through. They described what the raptors did. In Lubbock, they had a quite different behavior than what they did at the Palo Duro Canyon, which would be more of a rural area with limited amount of public right under the nest. They seemed to have all sorts of different behavior in the Palo Duro Canyon. In Lubbock, the birds either had no interest in defending their nests from someone walking below, or they aggressively attacked. In Palo Duro Canyon, they had a full range of behaviors, from a few birds aggressively defending the attack to some showing no signs of defending their nests at all. The initiation distance when they decided to attack varied somewhat. From in Lubbock, they waited till the human disturbance was about 10 meters away. It was 16 to 18 meters away in Palo Duro Canyon. They also were twice as likely in Palo Duro Canyon to swoop as they were in Lubbock. So trying to assess what all of that meant really come down to a very few things. They said perhaps the behavior in an area where the kites were constantly exposed to people, those birds had different levels of response to this human disturbance. The flight initiation distance was different based on the location and thus kind of the frequency of that disturbance level. But they also looked at what I thought was the most important part, was the characteristics of the trees where the birds had been nesting. Their study showed the aggression in kites was independent of those features of the nests, and the physical characteristics of that nest tree didn't explain that aggressive behavior. Previously in Kansas, I had told people that I thought maybe the reason we had problems in Kansas, not in the southeastern part of the United States, was the height of those nest trees. This study would seem to refute that, and that perhaps the birds just are different depending on the level of humans and the number of human interactions, and not really dependent on the height of the nest within the tree.
So still a mystery in some respects here as far as that aggression against intruders around nests. So the message to folks out there, if they know that kites are nesting in a given locale, try to not disturb that area.
Yeah, stay away from that area. Keep in mind these are birds that are here just for the summer. They're eating insects, and the likelihood of being hit by one of these birds that's protecting their nest is fairly low.
There's some background on the Mississippi kite and its nest protection behavior. Charlie, we appreciate the word, as always. Thanks. Charlie Lee, wildlife specialist, K-State Research and Extension. And so goes our Tuesday edition. As always, we appreciate you listening in and hope you'll be right back here this same time tomorrow. Until then, Eric Atkinson here bidding you a good day for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.